case back several years ago where, oddly enough, one of our biggest bad guys, coke trafficker, arms trafficker, weed trafficker here in Calgary, came to the attention of the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team when he got shot in the rear end. I was going to say, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that's
and
fine.
so all of a sudden they look up this guy and say, "Who's this guy? Why did he get shot? Is this a gangland thing? Was he an innocent bystander?" Well, it turns out, yeah, he's a weed trafficker, coke trafficker, deals in arms, and he's got quite a number of people working for him. So the alert team starts to work up an investigation. They call the proceeds crime team in to work with them. So we generally would assign one or two members to work with the project team that's doing the substantive case. So as they start to build up this case, one of the first things I did, and another member of my team, was send in this voluntary information record to FINTRAC. Mm-hmm. Does FINTRAC have anything on this person? We're investigating them for these particular reasons. I have reason to believe that they're laundering money. And within those first couple of 3-4 weeks, they have nothing. So there's been nothing entered by financial institutions, casinos, MSBs, and so on about the guy. So that's fine. We go on with our investigation. At the same time, we learn that he's just finishing off building a property in Bearspaw, which is a very expensive development west of Calgary. It turns out the house is worth about 1.5, 1.7 million. The house was registered, and this is important, in his parents' names. Nominees are often used in all these properties, and whether it's a trust, whether it's a numbered company. In commercial real estate, that's a different ballgame again, but personal properties, this kid was 23 years old. He didn't hold a job. And then when we looked into the parents, because you investigate the family in this case, because everybody's part and parcel of this, dad was a cabinet builder, cabinet maker. Mom worked in a hotel cleaning rooms.
Pretty tough to own a $1.6 million property all of a sudden with those.
Yeah, without a mortgage.
Yeah, it must be nice.
And so we're thinking that's not right. So as the investigation goes on, we're learning more about this guy. Well, one day the surveillance team sees him driving a Lamborghini. Not unheard of. He had a Land Rover. He had 2 or 3 other cars. They had a tow business, was their front business for laundering money. All their customers paid cash, and all their customers paid in $20 bills. Thus, he made these massive cash deposits in the banks under the $10,000 threshold. No suspicious transactions came out of that either. That's another story. Mm-hmm. People knock realtors, but financial institutions, all these places still involve people. People have to make judgment calls. People have to move things along based on their knowledge, their trading, their experience. So anyway, Lamborghini, we want to figure out where this guy's purchased this. Well, law enforcement here in Canada, Alberta especially, has access to the actual bill of sale documents. So reached out to the Alberta Government Special Investigations Unit, got a copy of the bill of sale. Turns out the fellow bought the car in the States. $88,000, give or take. There's transportation fees to bring it back here. I think that was close to 20. Bill of sale says on it, this was paid for in full. Took a chance. We called the dealership out there, explained who we were and what we did. And we were a little concerned that the dealership may tip off our guy. One of those judgments you make in a case like this. We generally do investigations like that after takedown or after the arrests, so the bad guy can't get rid of all of his assets. So that said, determined that maybe this fellow has sent electronic fund transfer to the U.S., and that will have been captured by FINTRAC. Sent off my VER to FINTRAC again. Within 2 days, I did get a disclosure back on the one transaction. That would never have come out otherwise, because it was just an EFT for $88,000 and then the transportation fees. But what that did was identify the financial institution where this guy sent the EFT from. One of the big 5 banks in Canada. We already knew about another bank that hadn't given us anything. We'd executed production orders. We'd been through his accounts, his business accounts. We didn't like what we saw, but it had nothing to do with the property. So that one STR led to the disclosure, which led to identifying a bank account. So at that point, we have to search the bank accounts that are associated to that STR. And what we do is start with a request the client profile. And the client profile provides, all the accounts that the person has and all the joint accounts and so on. So with that client profile and learning that he had 6-7 accounts associated to him and his family, we searched all those accounts. We got boxes of documents. But what that did was identify the parents' accounts, the grandparents' accounts, his brother's accounts, his accounts. And each and every one of them had a connection to building this house. The contractors were primarily, we learned from there, and we learned after our arrests and searches at the end of the day, but building towards that, there were checks made out to certain, concrete contractors, roofing contractors, siding contractors, landscapers. So that gave us all opportunities to interview people later to determine how they were paid. We also learned later that if the contract was for $40,000, the check that was delivered was $20,000 and $20,000 paid in cash.
Cash, right?
A lot of these guys are evading taxes on the other end too, by
Yeah.
accepting cash. So at the end of the day, we got this house. It was worth $1 million and change. Again, he had no income. The parents had no income to be able to have paid close to $1 million was the building costs. We got his business. We got 7 vehicles. We got a Breitling watch, jewelry, cash, $200,000 in cash, and we would not have gotten most of that without that single STR going, or EFT in this case, just one small report going to FinTrack,
right,
and identifying all these other accounts. Now, had an institution determined that this $4,500 deposit and $20 bills is not how tow companies work, and this other $5,000 deposit, 3 days later, and all these receipts, they had an accountant, all the receipts were for cash, so hundreds and thousands of dollars in gas payments, expenses for the so-called business were all in cash. The accountant should have done something as well and should have submitted an STR. Had they have submitted those STRs, all that information would have come to us quicker. Because FinTrack had our VER to begin with. That stays in their database. Police are working on a fellow. STR gets sent to them. Boom, they're going to send something back
right away. Yeah.
So that turned our whole case around. It was a single document like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and to me, it perfectly highlights this concept of the puzzle that you're trying to build on the investigation end, that the frontline people unfortunately will never know about and can't know about. To be fair, but you never know. But you never know how important that little tiny.
Very rarely as police do we ever get a chance to thank people, for helping out with like that. And, when it comes to us in the form of a disclosure with, 2 dozen transactions, 5 dozen transactions on a ton of spreadsheets, you're just so overwhelmed by the work, overwhelmed by getting something to court. And then you're moving on to the next one. You don't get a chance to say, hey guys, thank you very much.
Well, yeah.
Occasionally back in the financial institution world, the old days, I guess, because I'm an old guy. There's Christmas parties, there's stampede parties out here, and you'd meet the corporate security people, you'd meet some of the money laundering people. We go to conferences, like the one coming up in Toronto or the one in Vancouver there. Yeah. And you meet the money laundering people there. The real estate representatives show up for those sometimes, and you meet people, and then sometimes you can share kind of like what I'm doing here is, what, this actually made a difference. This was a particular case. Or, it actually results in, you talk to someone and they say, I've got something that just doesn't seem right, Steve. And they'll explain something to me. And my response will usually be, yeah, I think that's suspicious. That's well worth sending in. And then we generate more STRs that way, strangely enough. Or sometimes just leads, well, they'll send something directly to us. But we'll also follow that up with, you should be sending something to FinTrack.
By the way, send it to
And then they start going through their records maybe and understanding the concept of reasonable grounds to suspect, or, that money laundering isn't just cash, especially in the real estate business. It's the person, it's their transaction, it's what's not normal in what normal people, versus what legitimate people do.
It's funny, in my work, as we do consults with compliance officers, as we build out new programs for them, it's fairly common, I would suggest, that we end up having a conversation around a situation that brokerage had been involved in that they probably should have filed a suspicious transaction report on. And I would say probably more than 50% of the consults we've had have led to us saying, hey, you might want to reconsider this, because I think there's probably reasonable grounds to suspect that this situation you've just told me about actually was a suspicious transaction.
Yeah. And it's funny, we when I talk money laundering as well, sometimes there are the people that talk, expanding on that, maybe the big picture money laundering, the economic impacts, the price of houses in Vancouver and Toronto, and so on. But there's also the local level, and the smaller towns, the smaller cities. If a drug dealer, because that's easiest people to pick on, is putting their money into institutions, they're getting away with that so far. But they want to buy property. They want to buy their own investment property, a rental unit, or 2 or 3, or their own house, and so on. By submitting that STR, you have that immediate impact, even at the small level. It isn't always the big picture stuff that I think about in these cases as well. It's local police doing local work, seizing assets off of people locally that shows to the local community that crime doesn't pay. I'm going to take your assets. I'm going to take your car. I'm going to take your house. And if you've used that house to develop a meth lab or a marijuana grow or something, it's offense-related property, and we're going to seize it for that reason too.
Yeah.
But the person who maybe conducted a transaction to begin with says, this person's a student. Why are they buying a house? This person doesn't necessarily have employment. You may not even have to ask them formal questions. You're having a conversation with the person that you're acting on to purchase a house. And if things just don't sound right, maybe they aren't right.
And really, you don't need to. You as a frontline reporter don't need to go do the investigation. You just need to submit it and let FinTrack do what they will or won't. But at least you'll have done your part by flagging it, I think is what I would say. I want to come back to something you just said though, the small town thing, because I get that. I get that from a lot of people. Oh, well, I'm in small town, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, whatever. I'm in small town Canada. Money laundering doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that statement, Stephen? I think I know the
No,
answer.
yeah, exactly. No, not at all. Because again, it's that nebulous term, if you will, money laundering versus, purchasing of assets and living a certain lifestyle that we can't aspire to ourselves because we work and earn legitimate money. So, the whole point of maybe conducting some money laundering or many money laundering investigations is to identify the assets at the other end of the person that they purchased, the investments, again, the lifestyle, the cars, the houses, the real property, the rental units. And people who make a lot of money in small towns spend their money potentially in small towns. And if they're buying properties in these towns and they're buying those properties with dirty money, well, that asset can be subject to forfeiture. So really, money laundering is just a vehicle, if you will. It's the proceeds of crime in motion to lead us to that asset so we can seek forfeiture of that asset. Take that power base away from these bad guys that if they go to jail for that short time that they seem to get for trafficking 2 or 3 years, we don't want them to come back and still own that house.
Right.
I don't want them to sell that house in the meantime and put that money in the bank or an investment while they're in jail. So when they get out, they can start up again, with cash and with assets behind. So, that's where the small town comes into it. I think more they launder their money to buy assets, but there's also investment properties in smaller towns. Picture central BC through call it Vernon, call it Kelowna, well, that's a big place now, but these small towns, that there are cottages, there are real estate, or there are commercial properties that are being bought up these days. Buy up wineries, if you will. We were just down in the Soyuz area, and what's to say, some kleptocrat or oligarch from overseas doesn't want to drop, $500 million and buy a winery.
Sounds pretty
It's
nice,
potentially
actually.
dirty money.
Yeah.
So
And
it's even more than just small town, but those are small areas, but there's opportunity for big investments as well.
yeah. Well, and I think the point really is to make crime not pay.
Yeah.
And that's the objective. Lovely. Well, thank you for that story. I really appreciate it. I don't want to take too much more time from our audience, but I did want to give you an opportunity. Was there one other quick message that you thought was really important that you hadn't had a chance to talk about through the course of this conversation?
Yeah, maybe I touched on it a bit earlier that too many or too often we associate money laundering with cash, I guess, and again with what the Cullen Commission talks about and what's been in the media lately. It is that big nebulous, big picture problem. As opposed to it impacts us locally, it impacts us domestically, and so on. So it's something that's more than that. It is about the assets, it is about the people, it is about the underlying crime. But because people associate it with cash, they're not always thinking about transactions are suspicious and who may be suspicious. Our biggest issues in law enforcement and even I'll leave it with law enforcement for the time being is knowing who the ultimate beneficial owner of certain assets are. And if realtors can come to that or do more investigation and determine that the ultimate beneficial owner might be a politically exposed person who's been sanctioned by the Russians, might be an oligarch, a kleptocrat, somebody stolen billions from their country's oil reserves and so on. We need to know the ultimate beneficial owner. Something to keep in mind as well is the source of funds. Again, it doesn't have to be suspicious, the transaction itself, but where did the money come from?
Yeah.
And that's when you question the people's employment, their status in Canada, their associates. If you've done any adverse media checks, who would this person, did they show up? Yeah, and a media check is having a drug trafficking conviction or being a member of the Hells Angels or a brother of the Hells Angels, because nominees, again, coming back to the ultimate beneficial ownership. is one of our biggest concerns. So it's source funds, UBO, and not just getting it out of your mind that it's always about cash and the transaction itself. Now, very quickly, the attempted transaction is important, though. Someone does come to us, a realtor, and say, I've got $50,000 cash I want to put down. You're going to say, no, I know, I trust enough people are going to go, no. Go to the bank, get a draft, go to the bank, put it
Sure.
in an account, send me an e-transfer, get it into a lawyer's trust account. That's an attempted transaction, mind you. That should be suspicious.
Yes.
Anyone that comes with that amount of cash is, in my world, is suspicious. There's no excuse these days on why people are transacting that amount of money anymore.
I rarely have $20 cash in my wallet these days. It's all plastic. So yeah.
I've laundered my own money in banks, and we've taken out money to do undercover buys that don't happen. Then you go back to another branch of the same bank because the government used to deal with it. And all of a sudden you walk in with $40,000. And back in the day, I had the hair and the beard.
Nice. Yeah.
Teller looks at you and goes, I don't think so.
Oh, I'll take that, but let me just file this paperwork over here.
I've had paperwork filed, even though
Nice.
there's my ID, there's my badge. They still
That's
follow
awesome.
paperwork. And
I do
rightly
want
so.
to build on something you said, though, because what you just said is important for people to hear. The nature of, and I guess what I want to say is the nature of being a realtor or a mortgage broker is that you're in these very personal relationships. And as a result of that personal relationship, you often have information that nobody else in the world will have access to. When I go shopping with a client, if the father is the one actually there hovering over the shoulder, telling their kid what they can and can't buy, that might be weird. But I'm the only one who would ever see that because nobody else is a party to that conversation and to those conversations.
Flip that around, Greg, and what probably is more suspicious is the kid telling the father what they can and cannot buy. I've seen that with vehicles.
Yeah.
The vehicle's in grandma's name. She's 67 years old, doesn't speak English, but it's a Ferrari, it's a Corvette.
Right.
So when you speak to the car dealer in this case, it's so-and-so came in and with his mother, but he did all the talking. He asked about the warranties, and oddly enough, the multi-million-dollar property there, bill of sale, every car was in his dad's name.
Right.
Every truck, but all the initials on the bill of sale. I don't want financing. His initials.
Yeah.
So he put that together. So yeah, it's you will see people up close and personal, and you see how it's their behavior, not necessarily who they are, their race, anything like that. It's what they do that's different, that doesn't fit with what I'm going to do when I'm going to buy a house. My wife and I meet a realtor. We do this. Hey, what do you guys do? Hey, I'm a retired cop. This is what I got. Blah blah blah.
Sure.
You move on. It's normal conversation. You're much more intimate in that case, and sometimes it's harder to pass information on when you're intimate with people and you're friends with them. You humanize people, and it does make it harder to send in something that's suspicious. But on the other hand, realtors and all the other reporting entities are vulnerable to being abused by money launderers and criminals, people wanting to buy assets and investments. And it's been determined the world over for over 20 years. So it is, I'll say this, and I'm not admonishing anybody, it is time to get with the program, though. There's enough bad guys buying property. We'll never stop it all.
No.
That said, an STR doesn't mean you don't make a sale. An STR doesn't mean you don't take on a client. It just means I think I have reasonable grounds to suspect, again, it's like 25% of 100% beyond a reasonable doubt. This just doesn't seem right. I believe they're laundering money or using this property to launder money, legitimize their dirty money, or to flip it in the future. That said, if you've seen a property flip 2 days, 3 days later after the title's gone through, if something comes up in the land title registry that you happen to see, or they reach out to sell a property again, things like that are suspicious. And there's an obligation, a moral obligation, if you will, and this is me moralizing as a cop, to comply because of all the violence, all the problems behind the scenes that we don't see.
Yeah. And from a fairly, I don't know, this is crass, but I'm going to say it anyway. As a salesperson, you can still go cash your check. You're still going to sell that property, even though you're filing a suspicious transaction report.
Yeah. Oh,
and I mean, look, again, it's a little crass, but I think it's still true. And I guess people should take some comfort.
It's 100% true, because financial institutions deal, and that's, coming back very briefly, slightly different topic, but included, everything that they should be doing in their compliance regime is risk-based anyway. Mm-hmm. So you're risk assessing your clients. Is this a high-risk person? Well, yeah, they're from Eastern Europe. They've just come to Canada, or they've got a third party dealing on their behalf, and we've never seen them. They bought this property sight unsold, or it's a trust fund, or it's something else, or it's a trust, and you're not seeing the owner behind that. As opposed to, I'd like to think I'm no risk to buy a place, but if all of a sudden I turn around next week and buy a $2.5 million acreage outside of town here with cash, maybe my nephew, who's our realtor, might be going, hmm, maybe he would send something in, unless I have to say, hey, man, I won the lottery.
Well,
And, even then, so what I'm getting at is, actually, I got kind of sidetracked, Greg. Excuse me
no,
on
it's
that.
okay. It's funny because one of my favorite things I like to talk about is when I bought the home I'm currently talking to you from. My wife and I toured it for maybe 15 minutes, probably 10 to 15 minutes. We walked outside, wrote an offer for more than full price, subject free, and had bought this home 4 hours later.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah.
speed of transaction, there's a flag.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big flag, in fact. Paying over list, that's a big flag. Like,
A little less so these days, but yeah.
yeah. And it occurred to me I've often thought about that since, that somebody probably should have filed a suspicious transaction report on me. Not that I was laundering money. I was responding to the market conditions. I had perfectly good reason
Yeah.
to do what I was doing,
But
but there's some big STR flags
yeah,
there.
but that goes into the risk assessment.
Yeah.
My wife and I were looking at a condo potentially on behalf of her daughter, and hey, we're going to ask market price and slightly more if necessary. Apparently, there's 10 offers before we even made a call. So, but it would have been done. Hey, I can close it. This was like a Sunday. Called my nephew and said, "This is what we want to do." He calls back on Monday and says, "This is the case." And I said, "Look, tell them I'll close on Wednesday.
Yeah.
I can pay full price for this right now. Just pull out some savings and so on." So yeah, again, part of the risk assessment. That's where I got sidetracked earlier, if you will.
No, exactly.
You're assessing everybody you deal with, and you're documenting that risk assessment. It shouldn't be a tick box type of thing, but you can make it easy and make it that way, though. Where are they from? What's their source of funds? The questions that we put together earlier, and if there are actual indicators or terminology that people can use. This money came from a jurisdiction of concern, or we don't know the person's source of funds. That's the type of information, slightly different topic that goes into the STR.
But it becomes really helpful.
Generate interest by that FinTrack analyst when people use that terminology properly too.
Yeah. No, this is great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing from the front lines, the other side of the front lines, because it really does address something that a lot of our clients often ask about, which is, I feel like I'm just shouting into the wind with this stuff. And to hear you talk through how important the data that is coming through FinTrack can be to actually solving real world bad crime, is, I hope, helpful, and to me is encouraging, and I think people will generally get some value out of that.
Yeah.
So thank you for being willing to do it.
And if I may finish, every single case, like I say, will include a FinTrack disclosure these days. Every major project, every bad guy, every fraud, every whatever, and buried within that, our STRs from all the reporting entities that give us leads that take us further. Because really, the only way to go after these guys is to seize their assets and take that power away from them. Crime shouldn't pay. And these STRs from realtors, and I'd love to see more of them because I know they will provide some great information, stuff that's collected, will lead to so much more. And if at a certain point the police decide to execute a production order on the real estate office, and I don't want to scare anybody by saying that, what may be in that file may provide other leads as well, other financial accounts and so on, because again, it doesn't have to necessarily include bank accounts in these STRs if they're not known, if there's an attempted transaction. But, at some point in the future, that evidence or that information is going to become evidence, and it's going to be useful because, again, these pieces of a puzzle count, and I'll stand by that after 30 years of doing this.
No, and I think I will end this, I think, with a bit of a positive note and a positive spin, which is, in our work, we're seeing already that the culture of compliance that has been missing, people are starting to get that message, and they're starting to see where they should be filing STRs. In our work, we have a bunch of brokerages. It's double digits, who are waiting to file STRs, waiting because the web reporting thing isn't back up yet. Actually, it is. They have a phase 2 trial out of the new web reporting. I heard this last week, so it's almost back up. But anyhow, my point is, waiting to file pretty soon. But that wouldn't have been true 10 years ago, because there was not that culture of compliance. There was not that awareness of what should be happening.
Yeah. No, I can guarantee you there's no better feeling than getting a FinTrack disclosure that's got good information or good intelligence in it that we can use for something else. It's like, well, peaceful, I got that guy now, or I got this, or I've got something new. People like, I'll say people like me, the dozens and dozens of money laundering asset forfeiture people thrive on that. That's what makes our cases. And when we present some of our proceeds of crime cases, money laundering cases to these substantive teams, the drug teams, the human trafficking teams, and you show these people, I've seized this house, I've seized this car, I seized a donut shop years ago. That's another
Cool.
story. Yeah.
That's a dangerous one for a police officer. But anyhow, I'll leave that side of that part alone.
Yeah, really. Yeah, we had a city police car pull up while we were executing the paperwork. The fellow looks at me and says, I said, hey, by the way, we just put a restraint against this property. He says, what does that mean? I said, well, the government kind of owns this now till we can sort out the fact that these people are drug traffickers and they get convicted and it gets forfeited. He looks at me and says, so Steve, does that mean I get free donuts? I said, not likely now, man. I'm the owner of this place. I'm making as much money as I can. But no, I appreciate if everyone starts to do this, keeps it going. As I say, it's hopefully some of my excitements come out here that I believe strongly in this, and I still do it. And I know, again, the dozens and dozens of people that work these investigations just thrive on this. And it is really one of the most important ways to take down bad guys is to take their stuff and put them in jail. But it goes part and parcel as far as I've seen, and it's proven around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Much appreciated.
No, thank you for having me. Talk again.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Know Your Compliance podcast. If you'd like more information about our guests, have a story idea, or want to be a guest, please reach out to hello@kycpodcast.com. If you want to discuss your anti-money laundering compliance needs with a member of the Really Trusted team, go to www.reallytrusted.com/consult.